And then as we go on, he says, shut the words until the time of the end. Knowledge will increase. In other words, the book will be opened in the time of the end. The prophecies of Daniel and Revelation have come to light more in the last 200 years of the church's history than since any other time since they were composed or written. And so we are living in the time of the end where there's great knowledge on that. Now, I'm trying to read through all this and still have time to get to these prophecies. I look at the clock and it always is disheartening when I see how little time I have. Then I, Daniel, looked, and there stood, I'm in verse 5 of chapter 12, there stood two others, one on this riverbank and another on the other riverbank. That happens in Daniel 10:4 also. And one said to the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river, how long shall be the fulfillment of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river when he held up his right hand and his left hand to heaven. And he swore by him who lives forever that it shall be for a time, a times, and half a time. A time is one complete cycle of the seasons, or a year. They knew when this earth had gone around the sun once. One time was 1 year. A times means a pair or a couple of years. So that's how many? 2. 1 and 2 is 3. And a half. 3.5. 1,260 days in the Jewish lunar calendar. 42 months it refers to in Revelation. This time period keeps coming up in the Bible. And isn't it interesting that the angel, with an oath, standing on both sides of the water, lifts his hand and he vows and he quotes his time again. It's a very important time. Now think about this. Why is 3.5, 42 months, 1,260 days such an important time? How long did Jesus teach before he was crucified? From his baptism till he died, 1,260 days. The rain was shut up during the time of Elijah, 1,260 days. If you read in the book of Esther, Vashti is dethroned after a feast. The Bible says in the 3rd year of the reign of Ahasuerus, there was a feast lasting 180 days. Keep in mind, in a Jewish year, 360 days, half of that is 180. Right? So it's simple math, you can do that. 8 and 8 is 16. 360 is 2. In the 3rd year of the reign of Ahasuerus, you can look in the book of Esther, feast lasting 180 days, 3.5. Then the whole book of Esther unfolds after a 3.5 year period. Stephen is stoned after 3.5 years of the apostolic, the first time that they only went to the Jews, 3.5 years. Stephen is stoned. Then the gospel goes to the Gentiles. Then you've got from 538 to 1798, 1,260 prophetic years. Now, one thing I want you to notice about 3.5, numbers represent things in the Bible. 7 represents a complete cycle of time, perfect cycle. You have 40 represents what? Generation. 40 years they wandered till that generation died off. Read the book of Judges. It's all divided in 20, 40, and 80. Okay? 12 represents the church. Leadership of the church. Woman with 12 stars above her head. 12 foundations in New Jerusalem. And it's filled by 12 times 12,000. Right? 3.5 is an interruption of 7. It's half of 7. It's cut in the middle. In the midst of the week, he's cut off. It represents a time of resistance, persecution, apostasy. During the time of Christ's ministry, 3.5 years, was he accepted or resisted? During the time of Elijah, 3.5 years of famine, what's going on? He's hiding out. Jezebel's killing the prophets. They're in caves. During the time when 1,260 years, was it a time of open preaching of the gospel, or did the church have to prophesy in sackcloth, resistance, persecution? Something else you notice is there is a death at the end of the 3.5. When did Jesus die? At the end of the 3.5. At the end of 3.5 after Christ, Stephen died, first Christian martyr. At the end of the 3.5 in Elijah's time, the prophets of Baal are executed. And then Jezebel says, I'm going to kill you, and he has to flee. At the end of the 3.5 prophetic years, 1260, 1798, the beast receives a deadly wound. Always seems to be a death after the 3.5. And even in the book of Esther, Haman is executed. So just to stir up your pure minds, and I think the Holy Spirit will make some of that register. Now, if we stop here, it'd be easy. We understand 3.5. But there's 2 other time periods. It says here, a time, and half a time. I'm in verse 7. When the power of the holy people has been completely scattered. You notice, 3.5, time of persecution. All these things will be finished. Shattered. Although I heard, I did not understand. So don't feel bad. Daniel's having trouble understanding this. I did not understand. Then I said, my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Now, you know something? I emailed some of my friends, and I've gotten a lot of help from some of my friends out there in studying this. Pastor Doug stands on the shoulders of other people, as Newton said. There is a mirror in Daniel 12 that someone brought to my attention. It says in verses 1 and 2, Michael will arise at the end of time. It says in verses 11 and 13, Daniel will rise at the end of the days. It says in verse 1 and 2, those who sleep will awake. In the end of the chapter, it says those who enter into the rest will awake. It says in the first few verses, they'll be raised for their reward. They're in the book of life. In the end of chapter 12, it says Daniel will receive his allotted portion. He will be blessed. It talks about a distress in verses 1 and 2, time of trouble. In the 1290, it talks about a period of distress. In verse 3, I'm showing you a mirror between the beginning and end of Daniel 12. Instructors who have insight will shine brightly like the firmament. Verse 10, instructors who have insight will understand. You can go to verse 4. Daniel, conceal these words, seal the book. Verse 9, these words are concealed. The words are sealed until the time of the end. Verse 4, the end of time. Verse 5 and 6, there are 2 others standing on the river. In verse 8, Daniel hears, but he doesn't understand. And finally, you know what's happening? Is there's a mirror going like this through Daniel, and you know when it reaches the middle? When the angel stretches his legs across the 2 waters. Don't you see a reflection in the water? And he makes a vow with his hand held to heaven. It's going like this, and it's focusing our attention on that time period of 1260 because of the reasons I told you. That time period unlocks a lot of stories in the Bible, doesn't it? 42 months in Revelation, 3.5 in Daniel 12, 1260 in Revelation. There's many, many places that you can find that. Like I said, including Elijah, Stephen, Esther. It's a very prominent time period of persecution of God's people. Now, then he goes on. What will be the end of these things? Verse 9. Daniel, go your way, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many will be purified and made white and refined. There'll be a special outpouring of the Spirit. But the wicked will do wickedly. Those that are just will be declared just. Those that are wicked will be declared wicked. The wicked, none of the wicked will understand, but the wise will understand. And then he throws 2 time periods at us at the very end. From the time the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination of desolation set up, there will be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335 days, but go your way till the end, for you will rest and rise or stand in your inheritance, your lot, at the end of the days. I'm reading 2 versions together here. We finished Daniel 12, reading it. Oh boy, we haven't finished figuring it out. All right. I asked them to put a board up here. I'd like to put, in the studio, put up the first chart, the historic interpretation. I believe in the historic view. Does everyone hear me? What did I just say? I believe is what I wanted you to hear, in the historic view of Daniel. But I'm going to go on to say there may be an additional, a mere interpretation. There's many examples in the Bible where one prophecy can have a couple of interpretations that don't contradict. There's the literal, and then there's the more symbolic. When Jesus talked about the destruction of Jerusalem, he also said this is a parallel for the end of the world, right? When Nathan told David, your son is going to build me a house, he not only meant Solomon, he meant Jesus, the son of David, would build a house. So look at Daniel 12 with that possibility. All right. You have the date of 508. Let me put the dates down here so I don't confuse myself. You've got 538. Yeah, that's what you got it right up there. That's the historic view. And then you've got 1798. And then you've got 1843. Now I almost had to do this on a board for you to understand. All right, we all know that you've got 1,260 years going from 538 to 1798. Time of great darkness, persecution. Beast receives a deadly wound here. But then he says there's the 1290. Well, if you go back 1290 from 1798, now I'm not going forward, I'm going back. It comes to the first time that Clovis, the king of the Franks, French known today, converted to Christianity, the Catholic version. It was becoming a political thing. And it was the first time that the church and state united, and the church in Rome received an army to do their bidding. By 538, they had got rid of their three enemies, the Heruli, Vandals, and Ostrogoths. And that's when they were sort of uninterrupted in their power. So they go there, and then they say if you go 1335 from 508, that brings you to 1843, which is where you've got the Great Awakening, the proclaimant of the Second Coming. It turned into the Great Disappointment, but there was a great religious awakening that the history books support in this time period. All right, I'm going to set this aside for a second. This is the historic view. How many of you have seen this? If you read the book by Lewis Ware, Daniel the Prophet by Stephen Haskell, Uriah Smith, they all support the historic view. I believe that. Here's where I'm going out on a limb a little bit. Now, do we have room to study these things out and wonder if there may be something additional in the future? Are we allowed? Will you mind if I just share this? Now, keep in mind, I think we need to be very careful when you do these things. First of all, I don't believe in date setting. I think we need to be... Here, let me quote James White. In exposition of unfulfilled prophecy where history is not written, the student should put forth his propositions with not too much positiveness, lest he find himself straying into the field of fancy. What I'm sharing with you now is basically just study. We need to explore, because even Daniel said there's some things I don't understand. In the Sabbath school study, the writer also says there's a lot of propositions about this. I would respectfully disagree with the writer of the lesson where he says, we reject any future application. I think there may be something future in Daniel 12. Let me tell you why. Just looking at it honestly. Daniel 12, first of all, Daniel 11 says, the time of the end, the time of the end. Then Daniel 12 says, Michael stands up, resurrection, great persecution, great time of trouble. You go to the end of the chapter, Daniel, you will rest and stand in your lot at the end of the days. The whole context of everything is the great crescendo of prophecy. It's the great climax. To say that all of a sudden everything raptures back to Clovis, the king of the Franks, and what happened in 508, I think you can't block the prophecy there. I think you're limiting what may be there. Now, there are some quotes by the Spirit of Prophecy that have sometimes been misunderstood. Let me give this to you. This is from the Seventh Bible Commentary, 971. Let's put that up on the screen here. The people will not have another message upon definite time. After this period of time, she's speaking of the 2300-day prophecy that ends in 1844. After this period of time, reaching from 1842 to 1844, there can be no definite tracing of the prophetic time. Now, the word "the" is a definite article. What prophetic time is she talking about? The longest reckoning reaches to the autumn of 1844. Many people have used this statement and different forms of this statement to say, Ellen White said there could be no future interpretation of any prophecy. And she didn't say that. She was talking about people who kept moving the 1844 date and trying to reinterpret it. And she says, God's shown me that for this prophecy, for the prophecy, there is no time period goes beyond 1844. Does that make sense? You can't honestly use this to say that there's no time prophecies beyond that. I don't think that their time prophecy is to be part of our message even now, even what I'm going to share with you. Let's go to the next quote. Now, this is a quote from 6th manuscript release, page 251. 1 week ago last Sabbath, we had a very interesting meeting. They were dealing with a brother who is kind of off on his prophetic interpretation. Brother Hewitt from Dead River, I think that's prophetic, he's from Dead River, was there. He came with a message to the effect that the destruction, she begins to cite a number of his errors. Don't miss that. He came with a message to the effect that the destruction of the wicked and the sleep of the dead was an abomination within a shut door that a woman Jezebel, a prophetess, had brought in, and he believed was I. She said he believed I was Jezebel, this false prophetess, that I was that woman Jezebel. We told him of some of his errors. They recite some of his past errors, that the 1335 days were ended. Wait a second here. Here she says one of this brother's past errors was that the 1335 was ended. Isn't that what it says? And numerous other errors of his. She never quotes anything positive. She's quoting the errors of this brother. Does that make sense? You all with me? Let's look at the next. Is it true that there is no prophetic time in the future? Now I'm quoting from the Great Controversy, 640 verse 2. The voice of God is heard from heaven declaring the day and the hour of Jesus' coming. That's also in Maranatha and early writings. Now, if the voice of God is declaring the day and hour of Christ's coming, it hasn't happened yet, that is a prophecy, it is a time, and it is future. So you can't interpret her writings consistently to say there's nothing in the future that has to do with time. You still with me? All right. One more. July 30, 1903, letter to Daniels and Prescott. Let us read and study the 12th chapter of Daniel. It is a warning that we will need to understand before the time of the end. Future. We need to understand this. And so with that in mind, I think that we need to be very careful in our study of these things and not be dogmatic. But is it ever possible that in Daniel, does a day always represent a year in prophecy? Let's first talk about that. Daniel chapter 9 begins by Daniel reading the prophecies of Jeremiah. While I was reading the prophecies of Jeremiah that said that the children of God would be 70 years in captivity, those 70 years he refers to, are they literal or prophetic? They're literal. In Daniel chapter 4, where Nebuchadnezzar has a dream where 7 times pass over the king, those 7 times, we've learned that a time is a year, 7 times 7 years. Are they literal or prophetic? Well, they're literal. We know that Nebuchadnezzar historically, there may be a prophetic and spiritual application we don't know about, but I'm not going to go there. But we know that it at least has a literal application, right? Okay. So there is a precedent that, and if that statement I read by Ellen White a little earlier, she says, prophetic time is not to apply beyond 1844. Some have wondered, does that mean we don't apply a day for a year after 1844? But a day means a day. Now, with that in mind, in the studio, jump past this chart. We're going to go back to it, and I want to show, that's it. Yeah, let's show. There are many people, you keep in mind, and I'm not preaching heresy, I'm just trying to stir up, since our church, the jury is out on this, I think that we can share it without being heretics, right? Not being dogmatic. Everyone understand? We're praying and studying. There may be a last day meaning for Daniel chapter 12, in addition to the historical. Okay? In my office, you know how much mail I get at Amazing Facts where people say, I've done this Bible study, I'd like to share it with you. I probably have had 1,000, I might be exaggerating, studies that have come to me or emails where people say, I think there may be some last day application. These are good people. These are scholars in the church that think there may be some additional last day application for Daniel 12. Well, for one thing, we already know the time of trouble, is that past or future? Well, there was a time of trouble during the Dark Ages, but the plagues, when is that? Future. The resurrection, past or future? Michael standing up at the judgment ending, past or future? So many things we're looking at are future. Let's suppose for a second, you're going to have to look on the screen now at the chart that I'm showing. I'm not going to draw this on the board. There are a number of ways I've seen this arranged, but probably the most common is, let's suppose you've got 3 time periods in Daniel 12. You get 1260. If 1260 represents a time of resistance and persecution, that would mean where a law is first made that compels us to break the law of God, sometimes called a Sunday law. Doesn't it say in Daniel they made laws that required you to break one of God's 10 commandments? And many have believed that that will be a law that will force us to break the fourth commandment in the last days. And during that time, there's what they call the small time of trouble. You can't buy or sell. That may go on 3.5 years, a time of persecution. What often happens at the end of 1260? A death. A decree is made when they see that the people of God, and you know what? The message is going to go like wildfire during that time of persecution. Doesn't the church usually grow during those times? You look at the 3.5 years of Christ's ministry and the 3.5 years before Stephen was stoned, the church exploded. There's going to be a great outpouring of God's Spirit. At the same time, there's great persecution during that period. I don't know if it's going to be this, but it could be. Small time of trouble, can't buy or sell, might have to flee into the country. And you're all going to come visit me in Covelo, right? I'm going to the cave, just in case you want to know, during that time. And I haven't told you where that is. But then there'll be a death decree. Now, have you noticed in the book of Esther, a death decree is made. And by the way, Ellen White says what happened to the people of God in Esther will be repeated at the end of time. A death decree is made, and a time period from the time the decree is made until it's implemented. You know, most governments give you a time. They say, this is the law, it will be implemented at this time. In the book of Esther, the decree is made, but it's not implemented till a future date. The shortest time period that our government typically has for implementing something is 30 days. Isn't that interesting? So that might be the time from the death decree until probation closes. During that time, you're going to have to flee into much more remote places than just the country living. You might have to flee to the refuges. And that would be that 30-day period. Then the 45 time is after probation closes. Michael stands up. Great time of trouble. 7 last plagues. It refers to, you can look at also in Joshua 14 verse 10. It speaks about the time of Jacob's trouble. Now, 45 days. How long did it take for the 10 plagues to fall on Egypt? It wasn't months. It wasn't years. It was, you add it up and it's about 45 days. We're not sure because it doesn't give the time, but you just look at the scenario, and some plagues lasted for days, some happened quickly. There was little breaks in between when Moses went to the Pharaoh.
I'm sorry, but I was not able to copy the remainder of the DVD very well. Now, I believe very much that we need to be reading the prophecies and understanding them for our day. Sadly, most all of us SDAs have bought into the idea that nearly all the prophecies were completed in the past, so we don't need to be diligent students of prophecy today. Even SDA President Ted Wilson said in October 2015, "We are to follow the historicist view of prophecy and biblical understanding. Pastors, teachers, administrators, church elders, leaders, members, don't let anyone turn you from the historicist understanding." I must respectfully disagree. Not knowing the prophecies for their day is what destroyed the Jewish nation at the time of Christ. We are in imminent danger of repeating their mistake. I call on fellow SDAs especially to study the words of God. They are given to us on whom the ends of the world have come. Study the feast of the Lord to get timing clues and learn what Jesus is doing now. Study the books of Daniel and Revelation. And please, someone bind these 2 books of the Bible together and print them and distribute them like the leaves of autumn. And no, I'm not talking about Uriah Smith's book. I'm talking about the Bible books. And let's always remember in everything we do to keep looking to Jesus.